You are welcome to the presentation. We're doing growing and cooking summer style. Just really glad you're here today. And if you have any questions, what we're gonna do is just, if it's okay with everybody, we'll just put them in the chat box and I will try to watch the questions and we'll get to them at the end then, if not during, I guess. And so I'm the one speaking right now. My name is Andrea Nicolai and I'm on the left. I'm work for Polk County Family and Consumer Sciences. So I'm a dietitian and I know about food and nutrition. And so glad you're here. And then we'll also have Ann Yasalonis, and she is the Polk County Residential Horticulture Agent and Master Gardener Coordinator. So we're here today to talk to you about growing and cooking. So just some few things right away. If you're watching the presentation, to get to the chat box, if you do have questions or comments, you can just kind of hover over the bottom of the screen if you don't see it, and there should be a button that says chat, and you just click on that and then you can type things in there if you have any questions that you would like answered. And so last little thing I have is just, we'll send an evaluation after this, and it really helps because then we'll know how to do this better in the future. And this is our first time, Ann and I, doing this one together online with you. So if we have any problems, appreciate your patience. So just if you can please complete the evaluation, that would be really helpful. And so today's workshop, we're going to learn a lot of different stuff. And so I'm going to hand it over to Ann. So she'll talk first about how to grow, and then I will talk about how to cook. So let's see. Ann, I'm going to stop it sharing it here.
Oh, I just requested remote control, so you should be good to still share.
All right, can you share now?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were going to keep sharing. I will have to open it.
Oh, okay. Hold on.
This is why this is
No, okay, I got it.
Oh, you got it back. Okay. I did request remote. Did you give it to me, or do I need to do that again? I'll do it again.
If you don't mind.
Okay, well, thank you everybody for signing in and joining us today. So again, my name is Ann Yasalonis, and I'm going to do the growing part of this class. So what we'll do first is talk a little bit about planting, and we're doing summer style. So we'll talk a little bit about general vegetable gardening first, and then we'll move into solarizing soil, which is something sometimes people do in the summertime if they don't want to plant and grow things in the heat. But there are things that you can grow, and we'll talk about some of those as well. There's a couple little graphics there that you'll see, and that's just to kind of give you an idea if the crop is a self-pollinator or it requires bee pollination. And some crops will self-pollinate, but they actually do better with bee pollination as well. And we can pull some of that information for you if you're curious about that later on. Okay, there we go. Okay, so summer in the Florida edible garden. So just a few things to remember, because this is a time of year where it's going to be the warmest for us working outside. And I know we're only end of April, but we're talking about full summer. So at this point of the year, we're getting seeds ready, getting cuttings ready, small things going in the garden that we then would be harvesting throughout the summer. So it's important to remember that our hot and muggy temperatures could lead to disease and insect issues. So it's important to constantly be looking at those vegetables and monitoring them for that. If you are from up north or elsewhere, it's too hot for those summer tomatoes. You can grow some of the cherry tomatoes, and I'll talk about those, but none of those big tomatoes that you're used to growing in other places around the US. Those would have already been harvested here in Florida. We're looking for crops that are native to warmer climates, in addition to the ones that we'll talk about today. And just remember, as you're working outside in this hot, muggy weather, not only to monitor your garden and your vegetables, but monitor yourself as well. Wear sunscreen, hat, breathable clothing. We have a couple of blog posts on some tips at working outside in the heat. Master gardeners have mentioned oftentimes that they take beach umbrellas or tents or things outside and kind of move it around the yard as they're working to give yourself some shade while you work. So there's lots of things that you can do for yourself if you do enjoy gardening when the temperatures are warmer. So when we look at the very beginning, starting a vegetable garden, the key things to look for if you're just, looking out at the lawn, trying to figure out where you're going to select a site to plant some vegetables. We want well-drained soil in full sun. Those are the two most important things that we're looking for. Ideally close to a water source, because you will probably have to add some supplemental water. And the reason we like it close to that water source is because we want it to be easy for you to maintain. So not only close to a water source, but also close enough for you to be able to easily access those vegetables and, go out and grab herbs and things that you need, rather than making it a chore and, oh, I put this across the yard and I really don't want to walk all the way across there. So never mind, I'm not going to go water, or, I'm not going to go check for insects or harvest the parsley or whatever it might be. So those are some of the things to look for when selecting a site. But truthfully, you can plant your edible plants right into those ornamental plants as well. And I'll show you some pictures of that in a minute. So where can you grow vegetables? Really limitless, and it really depends on those two important things. Again, where you can find the well-drained soil in the full sun, but also how much space you have in those areas. You might only have a very tiny little pocket of space in your landscape that's full sun. And so maybe you can only fit a few containers, or a couple buckets for tomatoes or something like that. So there's lots of options for raised beds and containers and things like that. But certainly if you have more space, you can grow them in the yard as well. Lots of options here, again, for raised beds, all kinds of designs and styles. Make your own hydroponic systems are also really popular, but again, really depending on how much space you have and what works best for you. I did mention growing your edible plants right in with your landscaping, and you can see these pictures here show where the ornamentals and the edible plants, meaning fruit, as in that picture on the far left with the blueberries used as a shrub, all the way to the picture on the bottom right where chives are used to edge the side of a bed. The middle picture there shows rosemary plants just planted right in with those ornamentals. So they have an ornamental quality, and you can certainly use them that way as well. So that's something fun you can try. And you can certainly mix a bunch of different styles as well. So again, kind of figure out what works for you. Just like with landscaping, it's important to create a plan, have an idea of where you're going to grow, what you're going to grow, how you're going to grow it. Again, I mentioned you can have a mix. You can have a raised bed and then some containers, stuff in the ground that gets bigger, maybe mix some plants in with the ornamental landscape. And it's really up to you how you want to do it. I know for me, a raised bed and some containers for herbs works really well. It's important to have a seasonal growing plan. So maybe having a journal or guide that you track every season as far as what you're growing, plant name, maybe make some notes on how those plants did in your landscape so you can track that over time. If you decide to start with a raised bed in a container and you plant some things and find out you need a lot more room next season, those are good things to kind of track so that you can appropriately plan moving forward. And then a list of supplies that you might need to get yourself started. Seeds, transplants, soil, if you want to do any labeling, if you need any support systems, bamboo poles, twine, tools, anything like that, you can list that down as well. So when you're creating a plan, it's important to think about crop rotation. And these are some different designs as far as what people have done for rotating crops. And we have a couple of fact sheets that will really be good resources for you, and we'll email you those out after the workshop, but it makes it really simple to figure out how to properly rotate. The reason we want to think about rotating our crops is so that we can prevent those problems, those disease and insect problems from occurring. So if we rotate out of plant family each season, you know, those insects won't get used to those beans or tomatoes being in that same spot every year. So we need to think about rotating. This is a sample rotation plan, and you can follow this. We have this fact sheet that I've referred to at the bottom of the slide here, and I'll send you a direct link to that. But you can follow this to make it easy. And again, if you're keeping a plan or a guide, it's important to write these down. So if you have a raised bed with 4 growing spaces, you may want to say, okay, I'm starting now in May, and this is what I'm planting in space 1, 2, 3, and 4. Write it down, and then next season you go back to plant, you'll be able to look back and say, okay, I planted tomatoes in this section. I'm going to rotate to the next section for the next season, and so forth. So our guides will make it pretty easy for you to move forward with rotating. You'll also have to do some site preparation with your soil. So I mentioned we're looking for well-drained soil. So if you're planting right into the ground, that'll be pretty important. But many people choose to use raised beds or containers and things like that. And I'll talk about the containers here in a minute. But if you're planting in the ground, you can add your compost into the soil and till it in. Here you can see it says 3 weeks prior to planting. And this is important to kind of make note of the composted, uncomposted, and animal manures as far as days out from planting, as far as when you're tilling those in to that planting area. So the compost you can add anytime. So if you have a composter that you have going, you can continually add to your planting beds. Your uncomposted needs to be at least 30 days from planting. And if you're adding manures directly to beds, you can see how far out those need to be added. Typically, I would suggest adding animal manures to your compost pile, allowing them to compost there, and then you can add them a little more freely, because that really takes a lot of planning and lots of open bed space to allow for that 90 to 120 days. So till it all in and flatten it out prior to planting. If you're growing in any kind of container, again, choose a well-drained soil, and you can purchase mixes or make a mix of your own. Peat, compost, bark, perlite, sand, all of those work well. Kind of depends on what you're planting as well. They will need to be watered more than your plants in the ground, and it will also kind of depend on the type of container you're growing in as well. Clay, plastic, wood, those will all vary a little bit, and you will need to replace that soil once a year. If you're growing any of the hydroponic or soilless types of containers, you can see a couple of options here. There are lots of plans for homemade ones, and you can purchase a lot of them as well. So with the hydroponic systems, those are not using soil, so they're using water, and you'll have to follow those directions when you're planting in those, because you will have to add nutrients to the water mixture so that the plants are getting what they need to grow. And there's directions for that. We do have separate workshops on hydroponics, and there's lots of fact sheets and things out on hydroponics. So we talked about planting and soil, and now we need to think about watering. And those plants will need to be watered once they're in. When we think about irrigation, we need to think about how we're going to do that easily. So that's why I mentioned planning to have the garden bed near a water source or somewhere you can bring water to it pretty easily, just so it doesn't get to be too difficult for maintenance. So we want to think about, I don't think I did that. Whoa. Can you go backwards, Andrea? I don't know what happened there. So when we think about irrigation, we want to try and keep the foliage as dry as possible when we're irrigating, and irrigate right to the base of the plants. So we'll have a lot less disease occurring if we can keep the foliage dry, and a lot less weeds if we can keep from watering in between the rows. So that's why we look at things like micro irrigation, where they can spot water the plant material. It's pretty easy to install. I'll show some pictures on the next slide, and will really keep the water to the base of the plants. If you are using watering cans or doing any hand watering, kind of keep those things in mind, that you want to take the water all the way to the base of the plant and keep the foliage as dry as possible. Now, when we're looking at our micro irrigation. I don't know what happened here. When we're looking at micro irrigation, again, that's really easy to set up. It can attach to a hose bib outside. You can wind it through lots of different types of bed systems. You can see here, there's lots of different ways you can use it. So the top left shows where there's an in-ground vegetable garden. It's hooked up to a hose faucet outside, and you can just run the system there. If it's running through a grassy area that needs to be mowed, you can dig a small trench and bury the pipe there. The bottom left picture shows some containers with some drippers or micro irrigation spray heads. Those can go right into containers really easily. And the two other pictures, the top right and bottom right, show different styles of micro irrigation in raised beds. So the top right shows some that have been piped right into the beds themselves. And the bottom right shows the micro irrigation kind of on the exterior of the beds. And really with those systems, they're so easy to set up. You can buy, 100-foot or 50-foot starter kits and some micro sprayers and things like that pretty simply. But I would consider having a timer on those systems as well to keep them going. And we do also have lots of classes on micro irrigation, and I'll send out a fact sheet on that as well. So getting into our vegetables for summer, this is a planting and harvesting chart that is in one of our fact sheets. And you can see on the left there, it says warm season crops. We have one for cool season crops also. So the green or the X's show when to plant the crop, and the orange shows when we're harvesting. So if you go to May, you can see there's not quite as many X's in those planting boxes as there are in, February and March. So typically this time of year is, not as heavily planted as the spring and fall. But if you scroll down, you can see there's things like okra and peas that we are planting, and some other things that we're actually harvesting now as well. And so we have this in a fact sheet that is for both warm and cool season crops. And we're going to go over some of the crops that we can grow in our gardens in the summer. So the first one we're going to start with is okra. 60 days to harvest, and there's lots of varieties available. There's some fun different colors. There's purple. Okra is actually pretty ornamental as well. It grows quite tall and has very attractive flowers. So this is something that would be really nice planted in an ornamental landscape. Harvest the pods when they're 2 to 3 inches long. And again, you can see it will grow really tall in the landscape. So if you're growing in a container or a smaller raised bed, you need to be mindful of that size. Sweet potatoes. Sweet potatoes you can grow just about year-round, February through June. You start with small plants called slips, and you can buy them that way or start them yourselves. And they just will make a ground cover, so you could technically plant those right into the landscape. You can see those green leaves will cover the ground about 6 to 8 inches high, and 85 to 130 days you'll be able to harvest the sweet potatoes. You can grow them in raised beds, different containers as well. Some people like to layer them in large drums and things like that, but you can certainly give them a large space to grow out in the landscape as well. Our southern peas are another one that you can start now. So you can start planting those in April. And any of the peas and beans, you want to direct sow those seeds into your garden areas. 75 to 90 days to harvest. Use the peas that we have recommended. I will also send out a vegetable gardening guide that has the varieties of all of these vegetables that you want to look for planting in Florida. With the peas, there's all kinds of different varieties that that you can plant, and you can continually harvest until they stop producing. So really a good one to start with if you haven't grown many vegetables before. Now I mentioned no large tomatoes for summertime, but there are some smaller cherry tomatoes and things that you can grow and in the heat of the summer here. So You can start these seeds planting May through August, and you'll get your small cherry tomato varieties for Florida. So you can see here, if you're looking at seed packets and what to purchase or even transplants, it's important to remember to look to see if those plants will be indeterminate or determinate. So indeterminate means that they'll continually fruit, which most people do like, or determinate meaning they're going to produce one crop. And most of those cherry tomato varieties are going to continually produce for you. Jerusalem artichoke, I don't have much experience with this one, but this is a root, 130 days to harvest. Usually those things that are producing those big tubers underground are going to take a little bit longer to grow, but you can start them now. They're also called sunchokes. You can find those to get started. They will get pretty tall, so important to remember that as well. 6 to 10 feet tall for that above ground foliage. Peppers, 60 to 80 days to harvest from transplant, 80 to 100 from seeds. You can start those now. Lots of varieties available for peppers. These are good for containers. They don't grow very big, so they're nice if you're doing a variety of containers, smaller raised bed spaces, earth boxes, hydroponics, those sorts of things. Eggplants. Many varieties of eggplants available as well. You can get those started now. So you can see here where they're saying starting seeds in March. Usually you want to start the seeds a little earlier, and if you're running a little bit late in the season, that's where you may want to start a transplant. So if you're looking at any lists or anything where it's saying to start seeds, you know, March or February, and then you don't see that list till, I don't know, April or May, you can look for a transplant, and it's not too late for you to start that in your home garden. There's also a variety of herbs that you can grow. Many of them, you know, struggle a little bit with the heat and humidity in the summer, but there are a few that do pretty well just about year round. You can see the list here and some of the ones I have pictured. The top left is a bronze fennel. Top right is a tarragon. The bottom left is mint, and the bottom right is rosemary. And most of these are planted right into the ground. So again, you can mix those in with your ornamental plants. Rosemary makes a great small hedge. Mint is one usually people like to contain. So you can see here it's growing in a large pot. So that's something you can do. But the basil, oregano, the Cuban oregano, that has the more thick succulent type of leaf, you can grow that now. Your mint varieties, lemongrass, tarragon. You can also try, if you would like, a parsley, cilantro. It'll be a little bit tough to grow this time of year. So some of those that are a little bit more tender, if you have a little bit of shade, they might do okay, but most of these will kind of hang on and, you know, let the herbs go as long as you can. If you can extend them into another season, that's always good. Woody herbs like rosemary will probably last quite some time. So when is your summer garden done? So it kind of just depends when they stop producing. You can start taking them out, saving seeds when they look like they're starting to go to flower. If you want to save seeds for the next season, typically if we're planting in about April, we'll be done about June and July, and that's when you would start your cool season garden. So it really depends on if you want to just keep going as long as you can to get the crop, or you want to stop and collect seeds. So kind of think about that as well. If you have something special that you want to make sure you have seeds for the next season, make sure you're planning to collect those as things start to fruit and flower. And then you need to have time to prep that soil for the next season planting after that. Many people actually decide not to plant anything in the hot summer months, and there's some options for that as well. So if you're not growing anything during the season, you can plant a cover crop. And you can see some of them that you can use in Florida listed here. If you have very small containers or raised beds, it's really not a necessary thing to do. But if you have a larger landscape bed and you're worried about weeds, erosion issues, would like to do something to replenish the soil, you can look to some of these cover crops for those types of areas. Additionally, if you don't want to do a cover crop, you can solarize your soil. This is what people typically do in the summer months of June and July. And solarization, you can see here from the picture, is basically when you're laying down a clear plastic cloth, and the soil will heat up underneath of that, and it will eradicate any pests and diseases and things that are in there. But be mindful that if you've built your soil to have a lot of good things, it will also remove those as well. And you do have to leave it for 6 weeks. And there are specific instructions as far as making sure that the plastic is tucked on all sides. And if you want those instructions, it's good to go and read the fact sheet on soil solarization, so you make sure that you do it correctly. Vegetable garden maintenance. So fertilization will be something that you'll have to look at. I would suggest getting a soil test prior to planting to determine what you need as far as what you're growing. So I would start there. Typically that's something that we do out of our office when it is open. And so, you know, next season would probably be a time that we'd be open to take those soil tests for you. But if you've got a good soil mix, you know, new soil that you've purchased or added compost to, you should be good to get started there. And you'll have to see kind of what your plants are telling you as you go, and always read the label of the soil or the label of the fertilizer as you're going. Integrated pest management. So I mentioned putting your garden where you would be able to monitor it, and integrated pest management takes all of those things into account. So this is a way that you will be able to maintain your garden. So it looks at things like fertilization, insects, pests, disease, all of those things. And the main key with your maintenance of your vegetable garden is these first things that you see here on the slide. So sanitation, watering, and scouting. So with sanitation, again, making sure that the rows are clean and weed free. You can lay a layer of mulch in between, not water in between rows. That will again discourage weeds from growing, and not watering on the foliage of the vegetable crops as well to prevent disease issues. And then constantly scouting. And scouting is when you're just getting out there and looking and seeing what's going on and monitoring for pests, and then figuring out if you do have a pest, what to do at that point. So there's other things you can do, natural methods, following the label. We do have a plant clinic that is open now that you can send any questions to as you get going if you have any pest management issues with your vegetable garden. Diseases, a good way to start is with resistant or treated seeds. So if it's a type of vegetable that tends to have a lot of disease issues, you can start there. But again, those same things, the monitoring, the sanitation, watering, all of those things will be really helpful keeping a healthy vegetable garden. Whoop. The last thing was weeding. And again, weeding, the best way to handle that is hand weeding in the landscape. Not a lot you can do as far as spraying, doing any weed control there. You can see here in this picture, in between the rows is just soil, but you can certainly mulch in between the rows, and that will keep weeds down, particularly if you have an issue with weeds. But hand pulling is the way to take care of them if you do start to get weeds. But if you're not doing a lot of irrigation in between those rows, ideally you wouldn't have a lot of weeds occurring there. So the take home for maintenance is, again, remembering keeping things clean, watching what's going on, looking for insects and disease, something that's off, and monitoring that watering as you move forward. And then knowing that our plant clinic is there if you have any questions, if you see any, discoloration on leaves or insects that you're not sure of or anything like that. And then ideally you have a good harvest that you can go and start to utilize some of that harvest in your kitchen. And I'll hand it back to Andrea for cooking. There you go.
Thanks, Anne.
Mhm.
Okay, and then I see Gail has a question. Maybe we can just try to address hers in a little bit, Gail, if that's all right with you. So we're just gonna talk about cooking summer style right now. So just kind of what Anne talked about and then utilizing it. So you have all these things growing and sometimes we feel like, okay, there's a little bit too much of this. Maybe that's more so with like things like zucchini, but hopefully this will just give you some tips on using it and then storing it properly so that keep you well. So just today we're going to talk about the enjoying the vegetables, right? Preparing them safely, storing them, cooking them, and preserving them. So those are the key things I'm going to hit on. So just an overview. The shift, we're really trying to consume more vegetables, right? And so we used to have the pyramid, and the pyramid has become the my plate. And so what they doing here is trying to help you see about how much you're supposed to have of each of the different food groups. So if you think about it, if you look at your plate, what it's showing you is that half your plate should be made up of fruits and vegetables. So it's really a good goal to just try to check yourself in the evenings and see if half of what you're eating is fruits or vegetables, because if it's not, maybe you could add some on there. And if you have the garden, which is growing really well, then you can do that. And I will just hopefully give you some ideas on other ways to use them so you have variety. And so another thing that's important is just eating the rainbow, right? Each of the different colors has different nutrients. So it's like the orange ones, like the sweet potatoes and the pumpkin, they have a different nutrient than something like blueberries. And so it's like we need each of those different nutrients to help us feel our best and look our best. And so that's why I just like eat the rainbow, but not like Skittles. But okay, so just consuming more vegetables, and like how could you eat more? So one thing that can be really great is just anytime you're going to use meat, just replace some of it with vegetables. So maybe your tomato sauce is robust with ground beef, and maybe you could put in a little bit less ground beef or in your chili and just add some more tomatoes or add some green peppers or something like that. So just adding some of the vegetables in place of some of that meat and then using it as the main event. So kind of like you're using the meat as more of a garnish instead of just like, here's a piece of meat, and then my side items. And so just trying to remember that, like something like a big salad or a vegetable soup, but not even, like other things too, kind of like what is pictured and enjoying them in most meals and snacks. So kind of looking at your snacks and seeing, could I maybe include a fruit or vegetable with these? And adding extra to recipes. So maybe you have like a broccoli cheese casserole. Maybe you could just add in like like twice as much broccoli or just a little bit more even, just could be really good and helpful for you. Okay, so just preparing them safely then, just this is important now as ever, but just harmful bacteria can be in the soil or water where the produce grows. So especially when we're getting it at the store, that's why it's good to use to wash it, right? And so you might be wondering, well, what do I wash it with? And really all that's recommended is just running it under water. So even if you're not eating the skin. So if you're cutting a watermelon, you want to wash that under the water too. And if you have something with kind of rough skin, if you can use a clean produce brush to scrub it, like something like melons, it's really good because it'll help get any dirt or bacteria off. But just really, evidence has found that running the water over it is really the best. You don't need to use soap, and those things, aren't meant for consumption. And same with things like bleach. So just you're really okay. So just running water. Okay. So that's important there. And just preparing it safely too. You don't want your vegetables mixing in with your meat. And especially, so if it's raw, right? If you're going to cook the vegetables, I guess, yeah, but like, I guess ideal would just be to keep them both separate all the time if you could. And then if you're cutting them, wash the cutting boards with soap and water in between to keep the bacteria free. So just make sure the raw things don't touch the produce. So raw meat or just seafood, and the utensils too, you know. So if you're using tongs or something like that, add some vegetables and then you just use the tongs just to kind of serve your salad. And you're using it for the raw meat. That's where that cross-contamination can occur and that can make you sick. So just try to keep those separate when the meat isn't cooked. Okay, and then just whenever you cut it, with any of this produce, once something is cut or peeled, you just keep it cold. So store it in the refrigerator. So as we'll talk about, you know, tomatoes, they're actually best at room temperature and best to be left there. But if you're gonna cut all the cherry tomatoes in half, and it might seem obvious, but just put them in the fridge. Okay, so now let's just talk about some specifics. So it's kind of fun. So just okra, you might know it's famous for that slimy texture when it's cut open. But the more it is cut, the slimier it will become. So if you have somebody who loves that sliminess, then, you know, just cut away. But if you're looking at someone who's like, okay, you know, I'm not so big on that, so then the better thing would be to leave them whole and leave that stem on and things like that, especially when you cook them. And you can eat them raw or cooked, and they're low in calories and fat-free, and they have a high fiber. And it turns out that sliminess is actually good for us, kind of helping, you know, grab the bad cholesterol and things like that out of our body and take it out. So not a bad thing if you can get through that. So that you could use that to your advantage by putting it in things like soups and things like that. But it doesn't keep a very long time. So a perforated plastic bag, only a couple of days would be probably where you'd want to go. Sometimes you can spread that out, just take care of it. So just here's some different ways that you could maybe have it. So using that sliminess to your advantage, right? It's great thickener. So that's why, you know, it's awesome in gumbo or in soups or things like that, because it's really going to thicken that up then. And then you could roast them. And if you don't cut the ends, just, you know, that they would just be, you know, great. And so just trying to think about other ways that you could do it other than, you know, the fried okra. And so boiling them whole just until tender. They're great with tomatoes, onions. They complement fish and chicken and corn really well. And here just, I know an okra fan for sure, but, you know, he adds them to his eggs, which, you know, the taste, you know, when it comes, you know, they're very neutral, but it's just another way to get another vegetable. And here you see it on the bottom, it's actually in that waffle. Again, it's not an overpowering taste, so it's kind of a fun way to do it. So you can really do a lot of things, and you can actually make them into okra marshmallows. So you guys might have to look up the recipe for that. They don't look like normal marshmallows. I have tried it. And it's mostly a mixture of the water, the honey, the vanilla, and then some okra, but it's, you know, just another option if you have a lot of them. Okay, so sweet potatoes, right? They're great for vitamin A, which is really good for our eyes, you might have heard, but also our skin and looking like our heart and everything. But just storing at room temperature, they're great there. And then eating the peel for most of the nutrients. So most of the nutrients, they're like in that peel, lots of fiber there, and then right below the peel. So, you know, if you're peeling your potatoes, you know, you might end up taking a lot of the nutrients because it's really, you know, we found more on the peel. So try to eat that when you can and just wash it really well, right? And then you can eat the greens raw or cooked. And so actually in the Philippines, they're eaten like fresh in salads all the time, and they can be a good substitute for spinach in different dishes. So if you're kind of trying to figure out how to use them, but they're best cooked quickly. So not like in stir frying them or maybe steaming them so that they don't lose like essential nutrients. So boiling them also work, but then you might lose the extra vitamins in the water. So, okay. So then just in case you can't think of a way to use sweet potatoes, here's some different ways maybe. So having them in oven fries could be really good. Stuffing them with something. So you take like a sweet potato, just like you normally have a potato bar or something like that, and just putting that same kind of things on them. So things like walnuts and cranberries are actually really good with sweet potatoes. Quinoa, black beans, corn, like kind of a chili type of Mexican chili, maybe top it with a little cheese. Those things can work really well with sweet potatoes. And then adding them to smoothies or to an oatmeal, you know, they're sweet, called sweet potatoes, and so they add a great flavor and really good with cinnamon. So you can never go wrong there. But you know, soups, pie, mashed, you could use them in shepherd's pie in place of mashed potatoes, just for more vitamin A. Put them in veggie chilies, or I've seen burritos, or there's mac and cheese where you just put it in there. Can be great for kids. You know, it's not changing the color. So those are all just some good ways. Okay, so now we have the southern peas, right? They're part of the bean family. So there's 3 different kinds of southern peas, which I kind of had to understand. I'm actually from the north, and I was a little bit confused on southern peas, and I would get them mixed up with different things I was asking the farmers. But okay, so there's the Crowder peas, and they have a more robust flavor, and then there's the cream peas, which are more mild, and the black-eyed peas are somewhere in between, right? And so they're a good source of fiber and iron, just like any of the other beans. And then it's important to cook these before eating. So I wasn't sure, you know, if they were tender enough, if I could just eat them, but it's really recommended these you cook before you eat. Okay, so removing them from the pods and rinsing and then cooking. And so if you have like a pound of them unshelled, it'll give you an idea, would be 1 cup of the cooked peas. So they have that iron too, which is really good. You know, sometimes can be a good way to get it also. So here are 5 ways that you could use it. So you might think, you know, I guess there's the traditional ways of doing it, but if you could cook it with maybe lean pork or chicken, right? Or you could do smoked turkey or something like that, or cooking them with onions and green pepper and celery, excellent. And then mixing them with corn and using them as a filling for stuffed tomatoes could be an option. You know, making them into a chilled salad with rice, mashing them up and using them as a dip, just like hummus, and then cooking them in collard greens. And you might heard of Hoppy John, right? So those are just some things that you could do with them and that work really well. But anywhere that you use beans can be great. So cherry tomatoes, they're high in lycopene, and even more so after cooking. So we lose the vitamin C when you cook things, and so cherry tomatoes actually have a lot of vitamin C, so we lose that, but you gain a ton of lycopene. So you can enjoy them either way, and you're still winning. And so lycopene is an antioxidant that can help reduce your risk of cancer and heart disease. So that's why you want that. And the taste is really best when they're stored on the counter, not in the fridge. And it's funny, I always, you know, like I think about it, and, you know, tomatoes aren't usually sold in the refrigerator section at the store. But sometimes when I get home, I put my cherry tomatoes in the refrigerator, and, you know, their taste is really the best outside, and it actually gets better and the nutrients enhance if you can leave them out of the fridge. But if you do, you know, if you can't use them all in time, it's way better to put it in the fridge than just have it go bad. Okay, so you know, you're not gonna kill it or anything like that, but just you know, the taste and actually the nutrients too are better when they're out. Okay, so 5 ways in case you don't eat them all before you even come in your house. You can roast them. That could be a really fun way, and use that as a topping for fish or toasted bread, kind of like a bruschetta. You can mound them in a pastry shell and bake it. There's a cherry tomato pie and something like soup and salad, just things like that. They're great in there. And so they bring like this natural sweetness and add summer flavor to all kinds of dishes. So just really helpful that way. Tossing them with pasta like you see here. And then you could oven dry them too, or dehydrate them. So that's just another way. Okay, so now we have the Jerusalem artichoke, so the sunchoke. And so you don't have to peel them, which is kind of, you're looking at that and you're just like, are you sure? But you don't, and you can eat them raw or cooked. So this is really fun, fun one. It's mild tasting, almost like a water chestnut raw, you know, so it could be great in salads and you could just munch on this. And then when it's cooked, it becomes similar to kind of like potatoes, right? And so it's as yeah, so I guess I'm going to talk about more ways. So that's why I realized just getting into that. But they have fewer calories than potatoes, and they're a good nutrition value too. So they have the iron, the copper, and the potassium. I just talked to actually our Florida Friendly Landscape agent, who she might actually be listening in, but I asked her, you know, if we could plant these at work. So if any of you are in the area, maybe we'll eventually have some growing that you can come and check out if you haven't grown them yourself. Okay, so then just 5 ways to eat these when you have success, which you will, is you put them raw on salads. You could pickle them. You could roast them, right? Any way that you'd have potatoes. So cook them and mash them like the mashed potatoes, and then just dry roasting them too for 4 to 5 hours. So kind of fun. The puree is a little sweeter than potatoes. And then like when you roast them, it becomes kind of a nutty, sweet roasted vegetable. You can use them in soups or meatloaves, even things like that. So then peppers, we have refrigerate them. The capsaicin gives the hot peppers their hot flavor, and it actually turns out that that's really good for us. So if you like them, I guess, you know, great. Yeah, that really, it looks like it does a ton of things for us. It could boost your metabolism just slightly. I don't think it's the weight loss bullet, but and it might also suppress your appetite at least slightly and give you an extra edge with that weight loss. But I don't, you know, it's not going to melt anything away, but it just raises the body temperature a little bit. And so that uses up more energy. And also, it can help with pain, which can be also really good, and reduce blood pressure and help the heart. So they found that people who don't eat a lot of spicy things and then just have a little bit, it actually benefits those people even more than the people who eat it all the time. It's kind of funny, but the jump is just even more. So it's like our body gets used to it or something. But spicy peppers, just I've made the mistake once of not wearing gloves when cutting them when they're really spicy ones. That water does not wash that capsaicin away. My hand was burning for just I couldn't even sleep. I had to get up and put it in a thing of milk, which can help. But I don't highly recommend if you're cutting the really volatile ones to you know, really try to keep it away from your skin or eyes. And so the spicy heat, it actually comes from the inner pith of it and not the seed. So that can be important to know, the rib too. Okay, so bell peppers, they have as much vitamin C as an orange. So that's great. They're great, basically. Oranges have a lot. So, and most bell peppers, there's different types, right? But most of them will turn orange and then red if they're left on the vine long enough. I remember when I was in school and I figured this out, you know, I was just wondering how they did that. But, you know, that's why the red ones cost more, right? Is because they're on there longer. And the nutrients increase and then they get sweeter too. So if you're not a green bell pepper fan, you could just try a red one. And you know how I was talking about the rainbow? It's like each of those colors then has the different nutrients. So a mixed pepper stir fry would be a great addition to some meals. So 5 ways to use those then. You could stuff them. You could have them raw with hummus, just eat them, enjoy them. You could use them as a stir fry and use them in omelets or frittatas. They're really pretty too. So like you see on this pizza, you add them to quiches, things like that, and then roasting them can be really good. And the person who actually made this pizza, I know her, and she actually cooks the peppers just slightly before putting them on the pizza so that the water doesn't overwhelm the pizza. And so just a fun tip, and then you can add them right to your pizzas, even the frozen ones. Okay, so now we have the eggplant. Just to test ripeness, then you push on that eggplant with your thumb and it shouldn't spring back. You know, and Anne gave excellent tips on all that, but just storing in the refrigerator, and then it contains a lot of water. So some recipes might tell you to salt it and let it sit for a while to prevent the dish from being watery. And so you can definitely do that, and it works, you know, without. It just might have a little bit more water. So if you feel like skipping that step, it's still delicious, okay? And just a random fun fact, don't let this deter you from eating them, but did you know that eggplant is richer in nicotine than any other edible plant? So it's really the amount of nicotine from eggplant or any other food is like really negligible, like really small compared to passive smoking even. So you'd have to eat about 20 pounds or so for the same amount as the nicotine in a cigarette. But I learned that and I just wanted to share. So right down there, you have a picture of the eggplant Parmesan option. And you could do that without frying it. So just some fun ways to have it. It's really neutral flavor. It's great baked with tomato sauce. So it really loves, like tomato sauce is great with it. So you can slice it in rounds and you coat it in egg whites and then breadcrumbs and kind of bake it. And just, doing that instead of frying it can really help your health. So you can bake it whole or half. You could microwave it. You can just cut out the stem. You could prick it and you could put the whole thing in the microwave if you wanted and it would just cook. And so you can bread it in the oven like we were talking about and then use it in place of lasagna noodles, or you could puree it as a dip. And you might have heard of baba ganoush, really a great Middle Eastern Mediterranean dip, and it's delicious. So you can look up a recipe for that eggplant dip and serve that with vegetables or pita, and then you can make ratatouille. So ratatouille is kind of it's a summer dish, because you actually use summer squashes and tomatoes with it. So things that are ready around that same time then. Okay, so just those were about the vegetables, and now we're just going to briefly talk about just preserving them in case you can't eat them all, even with all those wonderful ideas, right? So freezing them. So you want to start with the high quality ones. So it's not like ideally is you would freeze them right from the garden. Sometimes you're like, you have it sitting in the fridge and you're thinking like after the third week or whatever, maybe I should freeze that. But you really want to do the highest quality ones and freezing them within a few hours, washing them before, and then almost all vegetables before freezing, you should blanch. Just so blanching the vegetables, you put them in a boiling water or steam for a short amount of time, and then you cool them. And so there's different amounts of time for each of the vegetables, but it's kind of when they turn like a color, I guess, or brighten up. And then you put them in cold water, and that deactivates the enzymes that would cause the vegetable to keep like deteriorating. So it wouldn't keep going bad, it's just stopping it where it is. And it helps them keep that nutrients. And then you want to try to use it. And you could freeze them on a tray and then transfer it to a freezer bag. So something like, the tomatoes, if they say we're all going to stick together, you could freeze them on a tray and then put them in, and then you can just grab them out of there. So fun fact, a few vegetables don't need to be blanched. So you could really, take those, wash them, put them straight in the freezer. And those would be things like the green onions, cut onions, peppers, and tomatoes. And some people like to blanch the tomatoes to remove the skin because it's not the same texture after it's been frozen. So those are good things to know on those. So then drying the vegetables. So just some things here, the calories don't change. And so it's the same amount in a more concentrated form. So just keep that in mind. So that's why I guess it actually could be better, right, to eat a grape instead of a raisin if you're looking to lose weight, because it has all that water in there. But it's nice to know it doesn't lose any of the flavor it doesn't lose any of the nutrients. It just kind of puts it down, except then there's that heat one, and that would be the vitamin C. So you can lose some of that. And there could be other ones that you lose small amounts, but mostly you can keep the nutrients in there and the calories don't change. And the fiber doesn't change either. So if you think about like prunes or dried plums, which is what they are, they still have a lot of fiber. So they keep the fiber, and then blanching is recommended again, just to enhance quality and safety. So yeah, just things to remember there. Okay, so drying vegetables. So I know this is not a vegetable, but I was just trying to show, how you can do this. So you can use a dehydrator or an oven. So either way, if you don't have a dehydrator, that can work. And you put it at the lowest setting and you kind of do that for a while, just until they're at your liking. And you might, if they're still a little soft, storing them in the fridge could be a good idea. but you can make things like sweet potato fruit roll-ups. I've done that in the oven. And then savory eggplant jerky. You could do sun-dried cherry tomatoes. Make your own sun-dried tomatoes, right? And then dried okra chips could be fun. So just doing this method instead of the frying them, just and you don't have to use any oil for this. And the peas, if you're drying them, then so leave them in the pods on the plants until it's died down a little bit, and then before they've split open though. And so you pick them, and then you keep them to dry for like, I guess they'll keep for a long time then. Okay, so canning the vegetables. So I won't get into this too much. We could have a whole class just on this. And so I just wanted to quick say you can use all different kinds of fruits and vegetables, from tomatoes to pumpkin, right? And 2 methods for canning. There's the boiling water bath, and then there's pressure canning. And this is the one that's safe for vegetables. So you really, pressure canning is what you want. So you'd have to look at those things, and I can get you resources if you're interested. And so using foods, again, at their peak of their quality, just like when you're freezing or drying them or preserving them in other ways, and then follow the strict canning procedures just so that you can make sure to stay well. And so they can be just as nutritious as fresh. So remembering that can be very helpful. So pickling, you can do it with all different types of things again. And there are 2 different kinds of pickles. There are the brine pickles and the quick pickles. And so you can go either way, but just kind of looking up the details for that. But it's pretty easy and another way to enjoy them and preserve them. Okay, so that's what we have for you today. And we have that evaluation. It'll be sent to you following this. And then Anne might have a chance to put it in the chat box. And if you'd like to just highlight it and then click it, and you can do it right now. But if you can please help complete that for us, we can do this even better in the future. Really appreciate your feedback and your time filling that out. So it's not long, but I appreciate that. And thank you guys all for staying all the way to the end. So this is a long hour, appreciate you. And so if anybody has any questions, you can type them in the chat box, and you can also contact either of us anytime later, and we'd be happy to help. So just really thank you a lot. And that's us. So
if anybody has any questions, they can unmute themselves and ask, or you can type it in the chat if you would like to as well. And I put the survey in the chat box along with the vegetable gardening guide. And then we'll also email the survey along with some fact sheets and some of the other things that we talked about as well.
Does anybody have any questions?
No questions for me. I appreciate it. It was very educational.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Okay, well, if we don't have any questions, I really thank you, and we'll look forward to hearing your feedback and hopefully seeing you at other classes. Thank you.